The wind off the Rockies cut like broken glass. Caleb stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. Snow already covered the ground 3 feet deep, and the storm building on the horizon promised to bury everything twice that. His horses were in the barn, restless. They could smell what was coming. "You're actually going through with this?" Tom Brennan stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was Caleb's closest neighbor, closest being a relative term when you live this far from civilization. The nearest town, Ridgeline, was a half-day's ride in good weather. In this? 2 days, maybe 3, if you made it at all. "Already saddled, Red," Caleb said, not turning around. "That woman's dead, Caleb. You know it. I know it. Hell, the whole territory knows it." "Don't know anything for certain." "The stagecoach is 5 days overdue." 5. In this weather, that means it's at the bottom of a ravine somewhere, or the horses bolted and scattered everything across 50 miles of nothing. Tom set both mugs down hard on the railing. Coffee sloshed over the edges, freezing before it hit the wood. Even if she survived the crash, she wouldn't last a night out there. Not alone. Caleb finally looked at him. Tom was a good man, practical, steady, the kind you wanted next to you when things went sideways. But he didn't understand. Couldn't. "I gave my word," Caleb said, "to a stranger. To someone who deserves better than dying alone in the snow." Tom shook his head, frustrated. "You read some letters. That's all. You don't owe her your life." "Maybe not." Caleb pulled on his gloves, thick leather, lined with wool. They wouldn't do much against real cold, but they'd keep his fingers from snapping off for a few extra hours. "But I'm going anyway." "Then you're a damn fool." "Been called worse." Tom was quiet for a moment, staring out at the mountains. The peaks were already lost in clouds, swallowed by the storm. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "How many letters?" 17. 17. Tom let out a breath that fogged in the freezing air. "What'd she say that's got you this twisted up?" Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out the bundle. 17 letters, tied together with twine, ink fading at the edges where his fingers had traced the words too many times. "Read them yourself if you want." Tom didn't take them. "Just tell me." Caleb looked down at the top letter. Clara's handwriting was neat but not delicate. Strong strokes, clear words, no flourishes. First one, she told me she wasn't looking for rescue. Said she'd had enough of men who thought a woman needed saving just because she was breathing. Told me if I was writing because I wanted something soft and easy, I should burn the letter and move on. Tom raised an eyebrow. "And you kept writing." "Damn right I did." Caleb couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his mouth. Second letter, she asked what I did when the work got hard. Not if it got hard. When. Said she wanted to know if I was the type to push through or the type to make excuses. What'd you tell her? Told her the truth. That some days the only thing that keeps me going is knowing I'll hate myself more if I quit. Tom grunted. She liked that answer? She said it was the first honest thing a man had written to her in 2 years. The wind picked up, howling across the empty fields. Snow began to fall, small flakes at first, then larger, faster. The storm was starting early. "What else?" Tom asked. Caleb flipped through the letters, stopping on one near the middle. She told me about her father, how he worked himself to death trying to keep a farm running back in Ohio, how her mother followed 6 months later, just gave up. Clara was 16, took care of her younger brothers until they were old enough to work, then sold the farm and split the money between them. Where are they now? East Coast, got families of their own. She said she was happy for them, but that staying wasn't an option. Too many ghosts. Tom nodded slowly. He understood that part. Most people out here did. The frontier was full of folks running from ghosts. "And the last letter?" Tom asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. He pulled out the final envelope, thicker than the others, pages folded carefully inside. She said she'd spent her whole life being what other people needed. Dutiful daughter, reliable sister, the one who held everything together while everyone else fell apart. Said she was tired of it, tired of being invisible, tired of waking up and not knowing who the hell she was anymore. He paused, the words catching in his throat. She said she wanted to be somewhere that didn't know her story, somewhere she could figure out what she wanted instead of what everyone else expected. Asked if I thought that made her selfish. What'd you say? I said it made her brave. Tom was quiet for a long time. Finally, he picked up one of the coffee mugs and drained it in a single gulp, grimacing at the cold. You're still a damn fool, he said, but I'll watch the ranch while you're gone. Caleb clapped him on the shoulder. Appreciated. Don't thank me yet. You're probably riding to your death. Probably. And if you do find her, she's probably already gone. Maybe. And even if she's alive, getting her back here in this storm is damn near impossible. Yep. Tom shook his head, but there was something almost like admiration in his eyes. You really think you can pull this off? Caleb looked out at the mountains, at the wall of white already erasing the horizon. No, he said honestly, but I'm going to try anyway. Red was a bay gelding, 15 hands high, with a temperament that matched his name. He didn't spook easy, didn't tire fast, and had carried Caleb through more bad situations than either of them wanted to remember. If any horse could make it through this storm, it was Red. Caleb loaded the saddlebags carefully, dried meat, hardtack, a tin of coffee, matches wrapped in oilcloth, a bedroll, extra rope, a hatchet, 2 canteens, a rifle and ammunition, a hunting knife, bandages and whiskey for wounds, everything he'd need to survive a week in the wilderness, everything except certainty. He swung into the saddle and nudged Red toward the trail. The horse snorted, ears flicking back, but obeyed. Tom stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching until they disappeared into the trees. The first hour wasn't bad. The trail to Ridgeline was well worn, and even with snow falling, Caleb could follow it by memory. The forest provided some cover from the wind, and Red moved steadily, his breath steaming in the cold. But by the second hour, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The snow came down in sheets now, erasing tracks as soon as they were made. The wind screamed through the trees, shaking branches and sending drifts cascading down like avalanches in miniature. Caleb pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth, squinting against the white. His eyes watered from the cold, tears freezing at the corners. His fingers were already numb inside the gloves. This was a mistake. The thought came unbidden, cold and clear. Tom was right. Clara Whitmore was dead. The stagecoach was at the bottom of a canyon somewhere, and she was frozen solid inside it, just another casualty of a territory that killed more people than it kept. He could turn back now. Go home. Mourn someone he'd never met and move on with his life. But then he thought about the letters. I'm not looking for rescue. I want to be somewhere I can figure out who I am. Does that make me selfish? He thought about the way she wrote. No self-pity, no excuses. Just raw honesty. The kind that came from someone who'd already lost everything and decided they had nothing left to hide. He thought about the last line of her final letter, the one that had burned itself into his memory. I'm coming to Colorado because I'm tired of being afraid. If that means I die trying, at least I'll have tried. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins and kept riding. Awesome. He reached Ridgeline just before nightfall. The town was small, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a single muddy street that turned into a frozen river when winter hit. A general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, a blacksmith, a doctor's office that was empty more often than not. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were either welcomed with suspicion or ignored entirely. Caleb tied Red outside the saloon and pushed through the door. The warmth hit him like a wall. A potbelly stove blazed in the corner, and the air smelled like wood smoke, wet wool, and cheap whiskey. A handful of men sat at tables, playing cards or nursing drinks. They looked up when he entered, faces weather-beaten and wary. Caleb Ward. The bartender, a grizzled man named Dutch, set down the glass he was cleaning. Didn't expect to see you in this weather. Need information. Caleb crossed to the bar, shaking snow off his coat. Stagecoach that was supposed to come through last week? Anyone hear anything? Dutch's expression darkened. You're not the first to ask. What'd you tell them? Same thing I'm telling you. Stagecoach never made it. We sent a rider out 3 days ago to check the route. Found tracks heading into the high pass, but they disappeared in the snow. No sign of the coach, no sign of the driver, nothing. Caleb's chest tightened. What about survivors? If there were any, they didn't make it here. Dutch poured a shot of whiskey and slid it across the bar. I'm sorry, Caleb. I know you were expecting someone. She's not dead. The words came out harder than Caleb intended. A few heads turned at nearby tables. Dutch sighed. Look, I get it, but the high pass is… I know what it is. Then you know anyone caught up there in a storm doesn't walk away. She's not dead, Caleb repeated. He downed the whiskey in one gulp, the burn barely registering. I'm heading out to find her. Now? Dutch stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Caleb, it's nearly dark. The storm's only getting worse. If you go up there tonight, you'll be dead by morning. Then I'll die looking. One of the men at the nearest table spoke up, a trapper named Garrett, lean and scarred from years in the wilderness. I know the high pass, Garrett said. If the coach went through there, it's buried under 10 feet of snow by now. Even if your woman survived the crash, she's long gone. Maybe, Caleb met his gaze, but I'm going to find out for sure. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You'll need a guide, he said. High pass is a maze. Easy to get turned around, even easier to ride off a cliff you can't see. I'll take you as far as the ridgeline, but after that, you're on your own. Why help? Garrett shrugged. Because I've seen men ride into storms before. The ones who go alone don't come back. But they left at first light. The storm had eased slightly overnight, the wind dropping to a dull roar instead of a scream. Snow still fell, but lighter now, flakes drifting down instead of driving sideways. Garrett rode a mule, sturdy and sure-footed, better suited for the terrain than a horse. He carried a pack loaded with supplies and a rifle slung across his back. He didn't talk much, which Caleb appreciated. Some situations didn't need words. The trail climbed steadily, winding through thick forest that gave way to bare rock and ice. The temperature dropped with every mile. Caleb's breath came in short bursts, freezing instantly. His face felt like leather stretched too tight, his hands like claws inside the gloves. Red struggled in places, hooves slipping on ice-slicked stone. Caleb dismounted and led him by the reins, boots crunching through snow that came up to his knees in drifts. By midday, they reached the high pass. It was exactly as brutal as Dutch had described. A narrow shelf carved into the mountainside, barely wide enough for a wagon, with a sheer drop on one side and a wall of rock on the other. Snow had piled up in uneven drifts, hiding the edges, making every step a gamble. Garrett stopped and pointed down the trail. Coach would have come through here, he said. If it went over the edge, you'll find it at the bottom. If it got stuck, it's buried somewhere along this stretch. Caleb scanned the pass, looking for anything, tracks, debris, a shape that didn't belong. The snow made everything the same, white on white on white, no contrast, no depth. I'll check the edge, Caleb said. Careful. Ice is thin in places. Fall through, and you're gone. Caleb moved slowly, testing each step before putting weight on it. He reached the edge and looked down. The drop was hundreds of feet, disappearing into mist and blowing snow. If the coach had gone over, there'd be no recovering it, no recovering anyone inside. But there was no wreckage at the bottom, at least none that he could see. He moved along the pass, eyes scanning the ground. Garrett followed at a distance, quiet and watchful, and then Caleb saw it. A shape in the snow, half buried. Dark wood, metal trim. Here! He shouted. Garrett spurred his mule forward. Together they cleared the snow with their hands, digging frantically. The stagecoach was overturned, one side smashed against the rock wall. The door hung open, hinges bent. Inside, the seats were torn, luggage scattered, but no bodies. Caleb climbed inside, heart pounding. Blood stained the floor, not much, but enough. A shattered lantern, a woman's glove, and a letter. He picked it up with shaking hands. The envelope was addressed to him. In handwriting he recognized instantly. Clara Whitmore. His hands trembled as he opened it. Caleb, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to Ridgeline. The coach overturned in the storm. The driver is dead. One passenger broke his neck in the crash. The other, a man named Samuel, and I are the only ones left. We're going to try to walk out. I don't know if we'll make it. The cold is worse than anything I've ever felt. Samuel is injured. I think his ribs are broken. He's slowing down. I'm writing this in case someone finds the coach, in case you come looking. I don't expect rescue. I just wanted you to know I tried, that I didn't give up. and that your letters meant something. They reminded me what it feels like to hope. Clara Caleb read it twice, then a third time. His chest felt like it was being crushed. She was alive. Or she had been, when she wrote this. Caleb. Garrett's voice was quiet. He was crouched near the front of the coach, brushing snow off something. Caleb climbed out and joined him. A body, male, middle-aged, frozen solid, face twisted in pain. Samuel, Garrett said. Caleb nodded slowly. If the man had broken ribs, he wouldn't have lasted long in the cold. Pneumonia, internal bleeding, or just exhaustion, any of them could have taken him. Which means she's alone, Caleb said. Garrett straightened, looking out at the endless white. If she kept walking, she'd head downhill, try to find shelter. How far could she get? Depends. If she's smart, maybe a few miles. If she panicked, less. Caleb studied the ground around the coach. Most of the tracks were buried, but he could make out faint depressions leading away from the wreck, heading south. She went that way, he said. Garrett followed his gaze and frowned. That direction doesn't lead to any towns, just wilderness and old mining camps. Most of them abandoned. Then that's where we're going. Caleb, I'm not leaving her out here. Garrett sighed, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and climbed back onto his mule. They followed the tracks. The trail Clara had left was barely visible, swallowed by snow and time. But Caleb could read the signs. A broken branch here, a scrap of fabric caught on a rock there. She'd been moving fast, trying to put distance between herself and the wreck. Smart. Staying with the coach meant freezing to death. Moving meant a chance, however slim. But it also meant exhaustion, hypothermia, getting lost. They pushed deeper into the wilderness. The trees thinned, giving way to open slopes where the wind hit like fists. Snow swirled around them in blinding gusts, and more than once Caleb lost sight of Garrett entirely, only finding him again when the wind died down. Hours passed. The light started to fade. We need to make camp, Garrett called over the wind. Can't track in the dark. Just a little further. Caleb, if we don't stop now, we'll be the ones needing rescue. Caleb knew he was right. But the thought of stopping, of Clara out there alone for another night, made his stomach twist. There, Garrett pointed. Old mining camp. See the ruins? Caleb squinted through the snow. Barely visible, maybe half a mile ahead, were the collapsed remains of wooden structures, cabins, sheds, a mine entrance boarded up and forgotten. They rode toward it, Red stumbling with fatigue. By the time they reached the camp, full dark had settled over the mountains. Garrett found a cabin with most of its roof intact and got a fire going. Caleb tended to the animals, brushing ice from their coats and feeding them what little grain he had left. When he finally came inside, the warmth from the fire made his skin sting. He sat down heavily, pulling off his gloves. His fingers were white at the tips, painful to move. Frostbite, Garrett said bluntly. Not bad yet, but it will be if you're not careful. Caleb flexed his hands, wincing. I'll manage. Well, Garrett handed him a strip of dried meat and a canteen. Eat, drink. You're no good to her dead. Caleb forced the food down, though he wasn't hungry. His mind kept circling back to the letter, to Clara's words. I don't expect rescue. I just wanted you to know I tried. She'd given up hope, thought she was going to die alone, but she'd kept walking anyway. That took guts. More than most people had. What's she like? Garrett asked suddenly. Caleb looked up. What? The woman you're risking your life for. What's she like? Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. I don't know, he admitted. I've never met her. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Then how do you know she's worth it? Because of what she wrote. The way she wrote it. No lies. No pretending to be something she's not. Caleb paused. Most people spend their whole lives hiding. She didn't. That's all it takes? Honesty? Out here? Yeah. That's everything. Garrett nodded slowly, as if that made sense. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. We'll find her, Garrett said eventually. One way or another. Caleb didn't respond. He just pulled out the bundle of letters and read them again, her words a lifeline in the dark. Morning came cold and gray. They set out at first light, following the trail Clara had left. It was harder to see now, the snow deeper, but Caleb refused to give up. Around midday, they found something. A coat. Clara's coat, judging by the size. It was frozen stiff, half buried in a snowdrift. Caleb pulled it free, heart sinking. If she'd abandoned her coat, she was either desperate or delirious. Neither option was good. "She's close," Garrett said. "She wouldn't have made it much further without that." They pressed on, moving faster now. And then, just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Caleb saw it. A cabin. Small, barely more than a shack, but intact. Smoke rising from the chimney. Smoke. Someone was inside. Caleb spurred Red forward, Garrett close behind. They reached the cabin and dismounted, boots crunching in the snow. Caleb didn't knock. He just pushed the door open. The interior was dark, lit only by a dying fire in the hearth. The air smelled like smoke and something else, something wrong. And there, on the floor near the fire, was a figure, barely moving. Clara. Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside her. She was skeletal. Her skin was gray, her lips blue. Her eyes were half open but unfocused. Frostbite had blackened her fingers and toes. Her breathing was shallow, labored. "Clara." His voice cracked. "Clara, can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered, moved toward him. Recognition, maybe, or just reflex. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Caleb Ward. I came to find you." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Garrett appeared beside him, taking in the scene. His expression was grim. "She's bad," he said quietly. "Real bad. I can see that. Caleb, even if we get her back, I don't know if she'll make it. She needs a doctor, medicine, things we don't have." "Then we get her back." Caleb's voice was steel. "Now." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, lifting her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, bones sharp against his hands. Garrett was right. The odds were against them. But Caleb had ridden into a storm to find her. He wasn't leaving without her now. He carried her to Red, secured her in front of him on the saddle, and turned the horse toward home. The storm hit an hour later. It came fast, vicious, a wall of white that erased the world. Visibility dropped to nothing. The wind screamed, tearing at them, trying to rip Clara from his arms. Caleb held on. Red stumbled, nearly fell. Caleb steadied him, urged him forward. Garrett shouted something, but the wind tore the words away. Clara's breathing grew weaker. Caleb bent over her, shielding her from the storm with his body. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Just a little longer. Stay with me." She didn't respond, but she was still breathing. And as long as she was breathing, there was hope. The storm tried to kill them 3 times before they made it halfway down the mountain. The first attempt came within an hour of leaving the cabin. Red lost his footing on a stretch of ice hidden beneath fresh snow, and for a sickening moment they were sliding sideways toward the edge of a drop Caleb couldn't see but could feel in his gut. He threw his weight to the opposite side, Clara crushed against his chest, and Red somehow found purchase, hooves scrabbling against frozen rock. They stopped inches from where the ground stopped being ground. Caleb's heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack a rib. Behind him, Garrett's mule had frozen in place, ears flat, refusing to move. "Keep going!" Garrett's voice was barely audible over the wind. "Don't stop!" The second attempt was quieter, more insidious. The cold crept into Caleb's bones despite the layers, despite the movement, despite everything. His fingers went numb first, then his toes. His face felt like someone had replaced his skin with sheet metal. He couldn't feel Clara's weight anymore, couldn't tell if she was still breathing. When he tried to check, his arms barely responded, muscles locked up and sluggish. "Caleb!" Garrett appeared beside him, mule pushing close. "Your lips are blue. You need to stop." "Can't stop." "You're going into hypothermia." "I said I can't stop." Garrett grabbed Red's bridle, forcing them to halt. The wind shrieked around them, snow so thick Caleb could barely see Garrett's face a foot away. "Listen to me." Garrett's voice cut through the storm. "If you die, she dies. You understand? There's a windbreak ahead, maybe 50 yards. We stop there, get warm, then keep moving. But if you push through this, you'll both be corpses before nightfall." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to keep riding, but his body was making the decision for him. His hands shook on the reins, his vision blurred at the edges. 50 yards, he managed. 50 yards. They found the windbreak, a rock formation that created a pocket of almost calm in the middle of the chaos. Garrett pulled out a wool blanket and wrapped it around Caleb's shoulders, then built a tiny fire using twigs he'd collected earlier and coaxed into flame with hands that moved like they'd done this 1,000 times. Drink. He thrust a canteen at Caleb. The water was half frozen, but Caleb forced it down. Feeling started to return to his extremities, and with it came pain. Lots of it. His fingers burned like someone was holding matches to the tips. His face throbbed. Clara. His voice came out wrong, thick and clumsy. Need to check Clara. She was still unconscious in his arms, but when he pressed his fingers to her neck, he felt a pulse. Weak. Thready. But there. She's alive, he said, mostly to convince himself. Garrett didn't respond. He was staring at Clara's feet, what he could see of them beneath the blanket Caleb had wrapped around her. That's bad frostbite, Garrett said finally. I know. She's going to lose toes, maybe more. I know. Caleb's jaw clenched. Doesn't change anything. You sure about that? Because once we get her back and she realizes what she's lost, I said it doesn't change anything. The third attempt came at dusk. They'd been riding for hours, the storm finally beginning to ease, but the temperature dropping as the sun disappeared. Caleb's whole world had narrowed to 3 things: keeping Clara in the saddle, keeping Red moving, and not falling off himself. He didn't see the ravine until Red stopped dead, hooves skidding on ice. Caleb looked up through eyes crusted with frozen tears and saw nothing ahead but white space, no ground, just emptiness. Back up, Garrett said sharply. Slow. Don't spook him. Caleb eased Red backward, 1 step, then another. A chunk of snow broke free from the edge and disappeared into the void. No sound of it hitting bottom. That wasn't on the map, Caleb said. The storm changed things, changed everything. Garrett dismounted and walked the edge carefully, looking for a way around. We'll have to go north. Add another 2 hours at least. Caleb looked down at Clara. Her breathing had gotten worse, more ragged. She'd stopped shivering an hour ago, which Garrett had said was a bad sign. The body gave up shivering when it ran out of energy to burn. We don't have 2 hours. Then we definitely don't have time to fall into a ravine. They went north. The detour took them through terrain Caleb didn't recognize, all landmarks buried or transformed by the snow. Twice Garrett had to dismount and probe ahead with a stick to make sure the ground was solid. Once they had to backtrack entirely when the path they'd chosen ended in a cliff face that definitely hadn't been there in summer. By the time they found a way down, full dark had set in. The moon was up but filtered through clouds, giving just enough light to see shapes but not details. Every shadow could be a drop-off. Every drift could be hiding a boulder or a hole. I can't see, Caleb admitted. His voice sounded far away, even to himself. Garrett, I can't see anymore. I know. Just trust Red. He'll find the way. What if he doesn't? Then we're all dead. But he will. Caleb wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe the horse had some kind of instinct that would get them home. But mostly he just held on to Clara and tried to remember why any of this had seemed like a good idea. The letters. That's why. 17 letters from a woman who'd been honest about wanting something more than the life she'd been given. Who'd had the guts to risk everything for a chance at it. And he'd promised. Maybe not in words, not explicitly, but in the act of writing back. In encouraging her to come. In telling her that Colorado was hard but fair, that it didn't care about your past, only what you could do now. He'd as good as invited her into this frozen hell. The least he could do was get her out of it alive. There! Garrett's voice jolted him back to the present. Lights. You see them? Caleb squinted through the darkness and snow. At first he saw nothing, then there. Small pinpricks of yellow light wavering in the distance. Ridgeline, Garrett said. We made it. They hadn't, not yet. Still 2 miles of frozen ground between them and those lights. 2 miles that might as well have been 20, but at least now there was a destination, something to aim for. Red seemed to sense it too. The horse picked up his pace slightly, head lowering, pushing through drifts with renewed determination. The lights grew closer. Individual buildings began to take shape. The saloon, the general store, the doctor's office. The doctor's office. Dutch! Caleb's voice cracked as they entered the town. Dutch, I need help. Doors opened. Faces appeared, shocked and pale in the lamplight. Someone ran ahead, and by the time Caleb reached the doctor's office, the door was already open, warm air spilling out into the frozen night. Dr. Pierce was in his 60s, hair gone white, hands steady from decades of practice. He took one look at Clara and started barking orders. Get her inside. On the table. Someone boil water. I need clean cloth, all you can find. And whiskey. The good stuff, not the rot gut from the saloon. Caleb carried Clara inside and laid her on the examination table as gently as he could. Under the lamplight, she looked worse than he'd thought. Her skin had a grayish-blue tint, her lips almost purple. The frostbite on her hands and feet had turned black in places. How long has she been like this? Pierce asked, already cutting away the frozen blanket wrapped around her. Since I found her. Maybe 6, 7 hours ago. And before that? I don't know, days maybe. She was alone in an abandoned mining cabin. Pierce let out a low whistle. Then it's a miracle she's alive at all. He pressed his stethoscope to her chest, listening. Heartbeats weak but regular. Breathing shallow. Core temperature is probably in the 80s if I had to guess. We need to warm her up, but slowly. Too fast, and we'll kill her. What can I do? Get out of my way. Caleb stepped back, and suddenly he was aware of how many people had crowded into the small office. Dutch was there, and Tom. When had Tom arrived? And half a dozen others, all watching with a mix of concern and morbid curiosity. Everyone out, Pierce said without looking up. Except you. He pointed at a young woman Caleb vaguely recognized as the schoolteacher. Sarah, I need your help. Yes, doctor. The room cleared. Caleb found himself standing outside in the cold again, Garrett beside him. Someone had taken Red and the mule, gotten them into a barn. Someone else pressed a cup of something hot into Caleb's hands. He drank it without tasting it. You did good, Garrett said. Caleb didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the lit window of the doctor's office, watching shadows move inside. I mean it. I didn't think we'd make it. Didn't think she'd still be alive when we found her, but you got her back. She's not safe yet. No, but she's got a chance. That's more than she had this morning. Tom appeared, looking like he'd aged 10 years. Jesus, Caleb, when you didn't come back yesterday, I thought, I know. The whole town thought you were dead, both of you. We're not. Not yet, anyway. Tom glanced at the doctor's office. What are her chances? I don't know. They stood in silence, 3 men covered in ice and exhaustion, watching the window. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, the door opened and Dr. Pierce stepped out. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his arms red to the elbows from scrubbing. Blood stained his apron. She's alive, he said without preamble. But I won't lie to you. It's bad. Caleb's throat closed up. How bad? The frostbite is severe. I've seen worse, but not often. She's going to lose at least 3 toes on her left foot, maybe 4. Possibly more depending on how the tissue responds over the next few days. Several fingers are questionable. And there's damage to her lungs, probably from breathing in freezing air for too long. She might have pneumonia. Won't know for certain until she wakes up. If she wakes up, Caleb said. Pierce met his eyes. If she wakes up. Can I see her? 5 minutes. She needs rest more than anything right now. Caleb went inside. Sarah was cleaning up, collecting bloody rags and used instruments. She gave him a sad smile and slipped out quietly. Clara lay on the table, now covered with clean blankets. Her face was still pale but had lost some of the grayish tint. Her breathing seemed a little stronger, though still labored. Bandages covered her hands and feet. Caleb pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. Every muscle in his body hurt. His frostbitten fingers throbbed. His eyes burned from exhaustion. But Clara was alive. I found you, he said quietly. Took me longer than it should have, but I found you. She didn't respond. Didn't move. Your letters. They weren't lies. You really did fight, harder than anyone I've ever known. And I know you're fighting now. I can see it. He reached out and touched her hand, careful to avoid the bandaged fingers. So keep fighting, please. I didn't ride through that storm just to lose you now. The door opened. Dr. Pierce stuck his head in. Time's up. Let her rest. Caleb nodded and stood. He took one last look at Clara, memorizing her face, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the lines around her eyes that spoke of someone who'd laughed hard and cried harder. Then he left. Outside, the storm had finally broken. Stars were visible through gaps in the clouds, cold and distant. The temperature had dropped even further, Caleb's breath fog-thick in the air. Come on, Tom said. You need food and sleep, in that order. I should stay, in case she wakes up. Pierce will send someone if she does. Right now you're dead on your feet. You won't do her any good if you collapse. Caleb wanted to argue, but his body agreed with Tom. He let himself be led to the saloon, where Dutch had set aside a room upstairs. It was small and cold, but there was a bed and blankets, and that was enough. Tom brought up a plate of food, stew, bread, something that might have been vegetables. Caleb ate mechanically, not tasting any of it. What happens now? Tom asked. I don't know. Don't. I mean after. If she makes it. What then? Caleb set down his spoon. Then I keep my promise. Take her to the ranch. Give her the life she came here for. Caleb, you heard the doctor. She's going to be... I know what she's going to be. Then you know she can't work a ranch like this, can't ride hard or herd cattle, or... Then we'll figure something else out. Tom sighed. You're going to marry her, aren't you? Out of some misguided sense of obligation. Out of respect. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to chain yourself to a stranger because you feel guilty. Caleb's hands curled into fists. You didn't read the letters. No, I didn't. Then you don't understand. Explain it to me. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out the bundle of letters, now worn and creased from being carried through the storm. He selected one from the middle and handed it to Tom. Read that. Tom unfolded the letter and began to read. Caleb watched his expression change, skepticism giving way to something else. Interest. Maybe even respect. When Tom finished, he refolded the letter carefully and handed it back. She sounds like someone worth knowing, he admitted. She is. But that doesn't mean you have to marry her, Caleb. Help her recover, sure. Give her a place to stay until she's strong enough to decide what she wants. But don't trap her into something she might not want. I'm not trapping anyone. When she wakes up, I'll ask her. If she says no, that's the end of it. And if she says yes out of desperation because she's got nowhere else to go, then that's her choice to make. Tom shook his head but didn't push further. He stood and headed for the door. Get some sleep. I'll check on her in the morning. Tom! Tom paused, hand on the doorknob. Thanks for watching the ranch, for not giving me shit about this. I gave you plenty of shit about this. Not as much as you could have. Tom smiled slightly. Yeah, well, someone's got to keep you alive. He opened the door, then stopped. For what it's worth. I think you did the right thing. Stupid as hell, but right. He left. Caleb sat alone in the small room, listening to the wind outside. His body ached, his hands throbbed, his eyes burned with exhaustion. But Clara was alive. He lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, and closed his eyes. Sleep came hard and fast, dragging him under like a riptide. He dreamed of snow and darkness and Clara's words from the letters, all mixed together into something that made sense and no sense at all. When he woke, gray light was filtering through the window. His whole body felt like someone had beaten him with a club. He sat up slowly, joints protesting, and pulled on his boots. Outside, the town was starting to wake. Smoke rose from chimneys. Someone was shoveling snow off the walkway in front of the general store. Caleb made his way to the doctor's office. The door was unlocked. Inside, Sarah was sitting beside Clara's bed. Pierce must have moved her from the table overnight, reading a book by lamplight. Any change? Caleb asked. Sarah looked up, startled, then shook her head. She's been stable. Doctor says that's good. Can I sit with her? Of course. Sarah stood and stretched. I'll go get breakfast. If she wakes up, come find me. Will do. Sarah left. Caleb took her place in the chair and looked at Clara. She looked better, still pale, still fragile, but some color had returned to her face. Her breathing was easier. The bandages on her hands and feet were clean. Pierce must have changed them during the night. Caleb wondered what she'd think when she woke up, when she realized what the cold had taken from her. Would she be angry, devastated, resigned? He wouldn't know until she opened her eyes. "Whenever you're ready," he said quietly. "No rush." Hours passed. Sarah returned, then Pierce. They checked Clara's vitals, changed her bandages again. Pierce seemed cautiously optimistic. "She's strong," he said. "Stronger than she has any right to be after what she went through. If she makes it through the next 48 hours without infection setting in, I'd say her chances are good." "And if infection does set in?" Pierce didn't answer. He didn't have to. Caleb stayed. Tom came by in the afternoon with food and news from the ranch. Everything was fine. The cattle were fine. The storm had passed without doing too much damage. "You should come back," Tom said. "Get some rest in your own bed." "I'm staying." "Caleb?" "I'm staying, Tom." Tom gave up and left. Dutch came by with coffee. Garrett stopped in to check on Clara, then headed back to his cabin in the woods. A few townspeople Caleb barely knew poked their heads in, curious about the woman who'd survived impossible odds. The sun set. Sarah brought dinner. Pierce checked on Clara again and declared her stable. Caleb stayed. He dozed in the chair, waking every time Clara's breathing changed rhythm, every time she shifted even slightly. But she didn't wake. The second night was harder than the first. Exhaustion pulled at Caleb like weights tied to his limbs. His frostbitten fingers had started to heal, but still ached constantly. His back hurt from sleeping in the chair. But he stayed. And then, just before dawn on the third day, Clara's eyes opened. Caleb almost missed it. He'd been staring out the window, watching the sky lighten from black to gray, when he heard a sound. A small intake of breath, different from the rhythm of sleep. He turned. Clara was looking at him. Her eyes were brown. He'd wondered about that, reading her letters. Brown eyes, tired but alert, confused but aware. "Hey," Caleb said. His voice came out rough from disuse. "You're awake." She blinked slowly, taking in the room, the bandages, him. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and painful sounding. "Ridgeline. Doctor's office. You're safe." She processed that. Her eyes moved to her hands, wrapped in bandages, then down to her feet, also bandaged. "The cold," she said. "Yeah, the cold." "Samuel?" Caleb shook his head. I'm sorry. We found him near the coach. He didn't make it." Something flickered across her face, grief maybe, or guilt. She closed her eyes. "You shouldn't have come," she said finally. "Probably not. You could have died." "Almost did." "Why?" She opened her eyes again, looking directly at him. "You didn't know me. Don't know me. Why risk that?" Caleb thought about the letters, about the promise he'd made, spoken or not, about the kind of person who kept walking through a blizzard even when they knew they were probably going to die. "Because you deserved better than freezing to death alone in a mining shack," he said simply. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. "Caleb Ward," she said. "That's me." "I imagined you taller." Caleb laughed, the sound startling in the quiet room. "Sorry to disappoint." "I didn't say I was disappointed." Her smile faded. "The bandages. How bad?" He could have lied, could have softened it, but she'd been nothing but honest in her letters. He owed her the same. "Bad," he said. "You're going to lose toes, probably some fingers. Pierce is doing everything he can, but the frostbite went deep." She absorbed that without flinching. "Can I see?" "You sure?" "I need to know." Caleb called for Pierce. The doctor came quickly, still in his nightshirt, and carefully unwrapped the bandages on Clara's left foot. The damage was brutal. 3 toes were black, clearly dead. A 4th was questionable. The skin on the rest of her foot was mottled red and white, blistered in places. Clara looked at it without expression. "When do they come off?" "Another day or 2, Pierce said. "Need to let the tissue declare itself. No point taking more than necessary." "And then?" And then you heal. Learn to walk again. It'll be hard, but you'll manage. What about ranch work? Pierce exchanged a glance with Caleb. Let's focus on walking first. Clara nodded. Her face was carefully blank, but Caleb saw her jaw tighten, saw her hands curl into fists beneath the blankets. After Pierce left, they sat in silence. You're thinking this was a mistake, Caleb said finally. Coming out here. No. Clara's voice was firm. I'm thinking I should have been more careful. Should have insisted the driver wait for better weather. Should have brought warmer clothes. She paused. But I don't regret coming, even knowing what it cost. Most people would. Most people didn't grow up watching their father work himself into an early grave or bury their mother or spend years being invisible while everyone around them fell apart. Most people don't know what it feels like to finally make a choice for themselves, even if it's the wrong one. She looked at him directly. I'd rather lose a few toes and be here than spend the rest of my life safe and small back in Ohio. At least this way I tried. Caleb found himself smiling. You wrote that in one of your letters. That you'd rather fail trying than succeed at nothing. You remember that? I remember all of them. Something shifted in Claire's expression. You really came into a storm to find me, based on some letters. Based on some damn good letters. She laughed, then winced, pressing a hand to her ribs. Don't make me laugh. Everything hurts. Sorry. Don't be sorry. Just... She hesitated. What happens now? After I heal? Assuming I heal. You will. But what then? I came here to work a ranch, to build something, and now I can't even walk. You'll walk, just differently. That's not an answer. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When you're strong enough, you come to the ranch. We figure out what works. Maybe you can't herd cattle, but there's 100 other things that need doing. Books to keep. Meals to cook, decisions to make. A ranch isn't just riding and roping. That sounds like charity. It's not. Sounds like it. Clara. He waited until she looked at him. I didn't drag you out of those mountains out of pity, and I'm not offering you a place on my ranch because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering because I think you've got more grit in your little finger than most men have in their whole body. And because if you're half as stubborn about healing as you were about staying alive, you're going to be just fine. She studied him, eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? Okay. I'll come to your ranch. When I'm ready, if you still want me there. I'll want you there. Even like this? She gestured at the bandages. Even like that. Clara nodded slowly. Then she closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her back under. But before she slept, she said one more thing. Thank you, Caleb Ward. For what? For keeping your promise, even though I never asked you to. Caleb sat back in his chair and watched her sleep, and for the first time in days, he let himself relax. She was going to make it. They both were. Dr. Pierce took Clara's toes on a Thursday morning. She'd insisted on being awake for it. Said she wanted to see what was happening to her own body, wanted to understand the cost instead of waking up to a fait accompli. Pierce had argued against it, said the pain would be unbearable, that there was laudanum if she wanted it, whiskey at the very least. Clara refused both. Caleb sat beside her and held her hand while Pierce worked. She didn't scream, didn't cry out, but her grip on Caleb's hand was strong enough to leave bruises, and the tendons in her neck stood out like cables under her skin. Sweat soaked through her nightgown. Her breathing came in short, controlled bursts. When it was over, Pierce bandaged what remained and stepped back, his face pale. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish, he said. Clara's voice shook when she answered. Can't it be both? After Pierce left, Clara finally let go of Caleb's hand. Her fingers were trembling. She looked down at the bandaged stump where her left foot used to end in 5 toes and now ended in 2. That's done then, she said. That's done. Can't walk it back, can't change my mind. It's just gone. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was better than empty comfort. Clara lay back against the pillows, eyes closed, breathing slowly, evening out. The letters I wrote you, did I ever tell you about my grandmother? No. She lost 3 fingers to a threshing machine when she was 40, kept working until she was 70, learned to sew with her left hand, did all the mending for the whole county, made more money after the accident than before. Clara opened her eyes. My mother used to say Grandma was too stubborn to let missing fingers slow her down. I thought it was a compliment. Now I'm wondering if it was a warning. About what? About how much stubbornness it takes to keep going when your body gives you every reason to stop. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara learned exactly how much. The infection Pierce had worried about never came, which was the only good news. Everything else was a grinding education in pain and limitation. Her remaining toes were healing, but slowly. The frostbite damage to her fingers was less severe than her feet, but 2 fingertips on her right hand had gone black and had to be removed. She lost feeling in patches across her hands and feet. Nerve damage, Pierce said, probably permanent. Walking was impossible at first. The balance was all wrong, her body not yet adjusted to the missing weight. She'd stand up and immediately pitch forward, only Caleb's hands keeping her from hitting the floor. After a week of that, she could manage 3 steps before her leg gave out. After 2 weeks, she could make it across the room if she held onto furniture. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. I'm useless, she said one afternoon, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her bandaged foot with something close to hatred. Can't walk, can't work, can't do anything but sit here and be a burden. You're healing, Caleb said. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing. Give it time. How much time? Another month? 6 months? A year? Her voice cracked. What if this is as good as it gets? What if I never get better than this? Then we adapt. Easy for you to say. You've got all your toes. Caleb pulled up a chair and sat down so they were eye level. You want me to lie to you? Tell you it's going to be easy? That you'll wake up one morning and everything will be fine? No. Then here's the truth. It's going to be hard. Harder than anything you've done before. Some days you're going to want to quit. Some days you're going to hate me for bringing you back. Some days you're going to wonder if dying in that cabin would have been easier. Clara's eyes widened slightly, shocked by the bluntness. But here's the other truth, Caleb continued. You survived a stagecoach crash, walked through a blizzard alone, lasted 3 days in a freezing cabin with no food and no hope of rescue. You survived me carrying you down a mountain in the worst storm in 10 years. And you survived surgery without laudanum because you wanted to see what was happening, so forgive me if I'm not particularly worried about whether you can learn to walk again. Clara stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was a harsh sound, more bitter than amused, but it was something. You're kind of an asshole, you know that. Been told that before. Good. I was worried you might be too nice. Nice is exhausting. I'm not nice. I'm practical. That's even better. She looked down at her foot again, but this time there was less hatred in her expression, more calculation. How long until I can go to your ranch? Pierce says another week, maybe 2. I want it to be 1. Then make it 1. But you're going to have to work for it. Clara met his gaze. What do I need to do? Walk. Every day. As far as you can, then a little further. Build the strength back. Teach your body the new balance. He paused. And stop feeling sorry for yourself. That's not going to help anyone. Most people would have been offended. Clara just nodded. Fair enough, she said. Help me up. She walked that afternoon, made it halfway down the street before her leg gave out, and she had to lean on Caleb to get back. The next day, she made it a little further. The day after that, further still. People watched. Of course they did. Ridgeline was small enough that a woman learning to walk with missing toes was the most interesting thing to happen since the storm. Some folks were kind about it, nodding encouragement, offering words of support. Others whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads like Clara was some kind of curiosity in a traveling show. Clara ignored all of them. Her world had narrowed to the simple, brutal task of putting one foot in front of the other. On the 5th day, she made it to the end of the street and back without stopping. On the 7th day, she walked to the general store, bought a bag of flour with money Caleb had given her, and carried it back to the doctor's office herself. Her hands shook from the effort, and she had to sit down for 20 minutes afterward, but she'd done it. Ready? Caleb asked that evening. Clara looked at him, then at the bag of flour still sitting on the table. Ready. They left the next morning. Tom had brought a wagon to town the day before, loaded with supplies. He took one look at Clara, thinner than she should be, moving with a pronounced limp but upright and determined, and nodded his approval. You're tougher than you look, he said. I get that a lot. The ride to the ranch took most of the day. The roads were clear of snow but muddy from the melt, and the wagon wheels stuck twice. Each time, Clara insisted on getting down and walking while the men worked to free the wagon, refusing to be treated like cargo. By the time they crested the rise and the ranch came into view, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything gold and red. It wasn't much. A 2-story house, weathered but solid. A barn, a stable, a chicken coop. Fences marking off pastures where cattle grazed, dark shapes against the grass. A well with a hand pump. A vegetable garden, dormant for winter but ready for spring planting. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. Home, Caleb said simply. Tom pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Clara down. She stood there for a moment, taking it in, then looked at Caleb. Show me everything. He did. Showed her the house first. Kitchen, sitting room, 2 bedrooms upstairs. The furniture was sparse but functional. The floors were clean, the windows let in good light. I sleep upstairs, Caleb said. You can have the room next to mine, or downstairs if the stairs are too much. I'll take upstairs. I need to practice stairs anyway. He showed her the barn next, where Red and the other horses were stabled. The chickens in their coop, the root cellar where they stored vegetables through winter, the smokehouse, the workshop where he repaired tools and tack. Tom's place is 2 miles that way, Caleb said, pointing east. Nearest neighbor beyond that is 6 miles. Town is a half-day's ride. Gets lonely sometimes. I've been lonely in the middle of a crowd, Clara said. This is different. By the time they finished the tour, it was full dark. Tom had unloaded the wagon and headed back to his own place. Caleb lit lamps inside the house and started a fire in the kitchen stove. You hungry? He asked. Starving. He made dinner, salt pork, beans, cornbread. It was simple food cooked without much skill, but it was hot and filling. Clara ate like she hadn't seen food in days. Afterward, they sat in the sitting room. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the windows. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the dark prairie. I need to ask you something, Caleb said. Clara looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. Go ahead. Why did you say yes? When I asked if you'd come here after you healed, you could have said no, could have gone back east, found something easier, but you didn't. Why? She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Because easy wasn't getting me anywhere, she said finally. I spent years doing what was easy, what was expected, being the person everyone needed me to be, and all it got me was invisible, forgotten. She looked at him. You asked in one of your letters what I wanted. Not what I thought I should want, but what I actually wanted. Remember? I remember. I didn't have an answer then, but I do now. She set down her cup. I want to be someone who matters, not because of what I do for other people, but because of what I build for myself, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. Caleb nodded slowly. And if it doesn't work out, if ranching isn't what you thought it would be, then I'll figure out something else, but at least I'll have tried. She smiled slightly. You said that to me once, in a letter, that trying and failing was better than never trying at all. I did say that. Were you lying? No. Then here I am, trying. The first month was brutal. Clara threw herself into learning the ranch with the same grim determination she'd used to learn to walk again. Caleb showed her how to feed the chickens, collect eggs, milk the cow they kept for butter and cream. Simple tasks, things that didn't require much mobility. But Clara wanted more. She wanted to understand the whole operation, how many cattle they ran, where the water sources were when they needed to move the herd to fresh pasture, how much feed to order for winter, what supplies to stock, how to read the weather and plan accordingly. You don't need to know all this, Caleb said after she'd spent an entire afternoon poring over his account books, learning his system. Yes, I do. Why? Because if something happens to you, someone needs to know how this place runs. and because I'm not going to be dead weight on my own ranch. Your ranch? Clara looked up from the books. Our ranch. If I'm staying, it's ours, not yours with me as a guest. Partners or nothing. Caleb considered that. Most men would have balked at the idea of a woman, especially one with missing toes, claiming equal ownership. But Caleb wasn't most men. Partners, he agreed. They shook on it, and that was that. The physical work was harder. Clara couldn't ride yet. Her balance wasn't good enough, and getting on and off a horse required strength and coordination she hadn't rebuilt. But she could mend fences if someone drove her to them in the wagon, could help sort cattle by working the gates while Caleb and Tom did the riding, could track inventory, plan purchases, negotiate prices with buyers when they came through. She learned to shoot, practicing with Caleb's rifle until she could hit a target at 50 yards. Her missing fingertips made holding the rifle awkward at first, but she adapted, finding a new grip that worked. Why do I need to know this? She asked after one particularly long practice session. Because out here, you might need to defend yourself, or put down an injured animal, or hunt if food runs low. Caleb reloaded the rifle. And because you should know how to do everything I know how to do, just in case. In case you die? In case I die. Clara took the rifle back and fired 3 more shots, each one closer to center than the last. Spring came slowly, then all at once. Snow melted, revealing dead grass that would soon turn green. The cattle grew restless, ready to move to higher pastures. Birds returned. The days grew longer, and Clara changed. Not quickly, not obviously, but Caleb noticed. The way she stopped favoring her bad foot quite so much. The way her hands, scarred and shortened, moved with more confidence. The way she stopped asking for help and started just doing things herself, figuring out her own solutions when the old ways didn't work. One morning in early April, Caleb found her in the barn, standing beside Red. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Getting on this horse." "Clara, I've been watching you for 3 months. I know how it's done. I just need to do it. Your balance is better than it was, and it'll never get better if I don't try." She grabbed the saddle horn, put her good foot in the stirrup, and pulled herself up. It wasn't graceful. She nearly fell twice, and Red shifted nervously under the unfamiliar weight distribution. But she made it into the saddle and sat there, breathing hard, grinning like she'd just climbed a mountain. "I'm on a horse," she said. "You're on a horse. Now I just need to figure out how to stay on while it's moving." That took another week of practice, but by the end of April, Clara could ride well enough to check the fences on the near pasture. By May, she was riding with Caleb and Tom to move the herd. She fell off 3 times that first cattle drive, got back on each time, cursing under her breath but refusing to quit. "You're going to get yourself killed," Tom said after the 3rd fall. "Maybe, but I'll die trying, which is more than most people can say." Tom looked at Caleb. "She sounds like you." "I know, it's terrifying." But there was pride in Caleb's voice when he said it, and Clara heard it. That night, after the herd was settled and they'd made camp under the stars, Clara sat by the fire and looked at her hands, scarred, shortened, capable. "I never thanked you," she said. Caleb looked up from the coffee he was making. "For what?" "For not treating me like I was broken, for expecting me to keep up instead of coddling me." She flexed her fingers, watching the firelight play across the scars. "Everyone else looked at me and saw someone damaged. You looked at me and saw someone who could still work. That's because you can still work. Because you made me believe I could." Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "I didn't make you believe anything. You did that yourself. I just didn't get in your way." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, listening to the cattle settling down for the night. Tom was already asleep in his bedroll, snoring softly. "The town thinks you're going to marry me," Clara said suddenly. Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" "I heard them talking last time we were in Ridgeline. Said you risked your life to save me, brought me to your ranch, let me call it ours. Said it was only a matter of time before you made it official." She looked at him. "Are you?" "Am I what?" "Going to marry me." Caleb set down his cup carefully. "Do you want me to?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking what you want." "What I want," Caleb said slowly, is for you to have a choice. You didn't choose to lose your toes, didn't choose to be dependent on me while you healed, but you can choose what happens next, and whatever you choose, I'll respect it. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. You're just not listening. Clara studied him in the firelight, trying to read his expression. You're saying you'd marry me if I wanted, but you won't ask because you don't want me to feel obligated. Something like that. That's stupid. Probably. If you want to marry me, you should say so. If you don't, you should say that too. This dancing around the subject is exhausting. Caleb laughed, a real laugh that echoed across the empty prairie. All right. You want direct? I'll give you direct. He turned to face her fully. I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd have me, not because I feel obligated and not because the town expects it, but because I've spent the last 5 months watching you fight harder than anyone I've ever known, and I can't imagine facing another winter without you beside me. That direct enough? Clara blinked, clearly not expecting that level of honesty. Oh, she said. Oh. Yeah. Oh. She was quiet for a moment, then, I don't love you. I know. I don't know if I ever will. Not the way people write about in books. I'm not asking for that. Then what are you asking for? Caleb thought about the letters, about the woman who'd written them, and the woman sitting across from him now. The same person, but changed, harder, stronger, scarred in ways that had nothing to do with frostbite. Partnership, he said. The real kind, where we build something together and trust each other to pull their weight, where we're honest about what we want and what we can't give, where we don't pretend to be something we're not just because that's what marriage is supposed to look like. He paused. I don't need romance, Clara. I need someone who won't give up when things get hard. And you've already proven you're that person. Clara looked down at her cup, then at the fire, then back at him. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, I'll marry you, but we do it my way. Which is? No church wedding, no big ceremony. We go to town, find whoever's authorized to do it, and get it done. Then we come back here and get on with our lives. She met his eyes. And no lying, not to each other, not about what we feel or don't feel. If this is going to work, it works on truth, or it doesn't work at all. Caleb held out his hand. Deal. Clara shook it, her grip firm despite the missing fingertips. Deal. They got married 3 days later in Ridgeline, with Tom and Dutch as witnesses. The justice of the peace was a dried-up old man named Crawford, who'd seen enough frontier marriages to not ask questions. He read the vows in a bored monotone. Clara and Caleb repeated them, and it was done in under 5 minutes. Congratulations, Crawford said without enthusiasm. That'll be $2. Caleb paid him, and they walked out into the street as husband and wife. That was anticlimactic, Claire said. Did you want it to be climactic? No, just observing. They had dinner at the saloon to celebrate, Dutch's idea. A few townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations, though most seemed more curious than genuinely happy. Clara handled it with the same practical grace she handled everything else, accepting the well wishes and ignoring the whispers. On the ride back to the ranch, Clara was quiet. Caleb let her be, figuring she was processing what had just happened. They'd gone from strangers to partners to married in the space of 6 months, and most of that time Clara had spent fighting just to survive. It made sense that she might need time to catch up emotionally to where they were practically, but when they got home and started unloading the wagon, Clara finally spoke. I need you to know something. Caleb looked at her over an armload of supplies. What's that? I meant what I said about not loving you. Not yet, anyway. But that doesn't mean I don't care. About you, about this place, about what we're building. She set down the bag she was carrying. I just don't want you waiting for something I might not be able to give. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm just here, same as you, figuring it out as we go. Clara nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. Then she picked up her bag and limped toward the house, and Caleb followed. That night they slept in separate rooms, same as they had since she'd arrived. Neither of them suggested otherwise. The marriage was legal, but it was also practical, a partnership built on necessity and mutual respect, rather than passion or romance. And somehow that felt right. Summer came with work that never ended. The cattle needed tending, Fences needed mending, hay needed cutting. Clara worked beside Caleb from dawn until dusk, learning as she went, making mistakes and fixing them, slowly becoming as much a part of the ranch as the land itself. She still couldn't do everything Caleb could. Probably never would. But she found ways around her limitations, developing her own methods that worked with her changed body instead of fighting against it. And somewhere in the long days and hard work, something shifted between them. Not love, not exactly, but something deeper than friendship, more solid than convenience, a understanding that they were in this together, come what may. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the mountains. The day's heat was finally breaking, and a cool breeze carried the smell of grass and distant rain. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Riding into that storm?" Caleb thought about it. About the cold, the fear, the very real possibility that he'd die trying to save someone he'd never met. "No," he said honestly. "You? Coming out here or marrying you?" "Either. Both." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Ask me again in 10 years. "Fair enough." They sat in companionable silence as the stars came out one by one, and somewhere in the dark prairie, the cattle lowed softly to each other, and the ranch that was theirs, truly theirs, settled into sleep around them. The first real fight came in September. They'd been married 4 months, and the partnership had worked well enough that Caleb had almost forgotten it wasn't a traditional marriage. They divided labor based on capability rather than gender, ate meals together, talked about the ranch's future like they were building something that would outlast them both. It was comfortable, functional. Until the day Frank Morrison showed up. Morrison owned the largest spread in the territory, 5 times the size of Caleb's ranch, with more cattle and more hands to work them. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits even in the middle of nowhere and treated anyone with less land than him like they were sharecroppers waiting for orders. He rode up to the house on a black stallion that probably cost more than Caleb's entire herd, dismounted without being invited, and walked straight onto the porch like he owned it. "Ward," he said by way of greeting. Caleb was mending a harness on the porch steps. He didn't stand up. "Morrison. Heard you got yourself a wife. Thought I'd come by and meet her." "She's working." "Then fetch her. This concerns her too." Clara appeared in the doorway before Caleb could respond, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd been making bread, and flour dusted her arms up to the elbows. She looked at Morrison the way she might look at a coyote that had wandered too close to the chicken coop. "I'm Clara Ward," she said. "What do you want?" Morrison's eyes traveled from her face down to her feet, lingering on the slight limp that never quite went away. His expression shifted, something between pity and disdain. "Frank Morrison. I own the Double M Ranch, about 15 miles north." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've got a proposition for you folks." "We're not interested," Caleb said. "You haven't heard it yet." "Don't need to. If it's coming from you, it's either a bad deal or an insult. Either way, the answer's no." Morrison's smile tightened. "Water rights, that's what I'm here about. The creek that runs through your south pasture feeds into my land downstream. Been having problems with flow this summer. Figured maybe we could work something out. The creek's on my land, water flows where it flows. See, that's where we've got a problem. My cattle need that water, and with your operation expanding," he glanced at Clara again, "or trying to expand, you're using more than your share. My share is whatever runs through my property. That's a narrow way of looking at it. It's the legal way of looking at it." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Look, Ward, I'm trying to be neighborly here. I'm offering to buy the water rights from you. Fair price. You'd still have access, but we'd work out a schedule. Make sure everyone gets what they need. And if I say no, then we've got a problem. And problems out here have a way of getting ugly." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Clara stepped forward, moving past Caleb to stand at the top of the porch steps. "Let me make sure I understand," she said. "You want to buy rights to water on our land because you're having trouble managing your own resources. And if we refuse, you're suggesting there might be consequences." Morrison looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Whatever he saw made him reassess. "I'm suggesting that cooperation benefits everyone. Cooperation implies mutual benefit. What you're describing is you taking what you want and calling it fair." "Mrs. Ward, no." Clara's voice was flat. The answer is no. The creek is ours. The water is ours. And we don't need your money or your threats. You can leave now. Morrison's face darkened. You might want to think carefully before making an enemy of me. I don't have to think about it. I already decided. Now get off our property. For a moment, Caleb thought Morrison might push it. The man's hand moved toward his hip, not to his gun, but close enough to make a point. Then he seemed to think better of it, perhaps remembering that Caleb was still sitting there with a knife in his hand from the harness work. You're making a mistake, Morrison said. Won't be my first, Clara replied. Morrison mounted his horse and rode off without another word. Caleb waited until he was out of sight before standing up. That was stupid, he said. Clara turned to face him. Excuse me? You just made an enemy of the most powerful rancher in the territory. Over water rights we could have negotiated. Negotiated? He wasn't negotiating, he was taking. Maybe. But there are ways to handle men like Morrison without burning bridges. I'm not interested in building bridges with men who think they can bully us into giving up what's ours. And I'm not interested in starting a war we can't win. The words came out louder than Caleb intended. Clara's eyes narrowed. So what would you have done? Smiled and said yes? Let him walk all over us because he's got more land and more money? I would have been smart about it, found a compromise, given him something small to avoid giving him something big later. That's not compromise, that's surrender. That's survival. They stood there, staring at each other, both breathing hard. It was the first time they'd really fought, and it felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea how far the fall would be. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice tight and controlled. I came out here to build something, not to spend my life bowing to men who think they're entitled to whatever they want just because they had a head start. If that's what you want in a partner, you married the wrong woman. She went inside, the screen door slamming behind her. Caleb stood on the porch, anger and frustration warring with the uncomfortable realization that she wasn't entirely wrong. They didn't speak for the rest of the day. Clara worked in the house. Caleb worked in the barn. At dinner, they ate in silence, the tension between them thick enough to choke on. That night, lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling, Caleb heard Clara moving around in the next room, heard her pace, heard her stop and start again. Finally, around midnight, he got up and knocked on her door. What? Her voice was muffled. Can we talk? Depends. Are you going to tell me I'm stupid again? I didn't call you stupid. You said what I did was stupid. Same thing. Caleb leaned his forehead against the door. Can I come in? A pause. Then, fine. He opened the door. Claire was sitting on the edge of her bed, still fully dressed, staring out the window at the dark prairie. She didn't look at him when he entered. I'm sorry, Caleb said. For what, specifically? For saying you were stupid. You weren't. You were brave, and you were right that Morrison was trying to bully us. But I'm scared. The admission came hard. Morrison has power, money, connections. If he decides to come after us, he can make our lives hell in ways we can't fight. And I don't know how to protect this place, protect you, if we're at war with him. Clara finally looked at him. You think I'm not scared? You think I don't know what men like Morrison can do? She stood up, walked to the window. But I also know what happens when you give bullies an inch. They take everything. I watched it happen to my father, watched him compromise and negotiate and try to be reasonable with men who just kept taking until there was nothing left. And then he died, and they moved on to the next person they could bleed dry. This isn't Ohio. This isn't your father. No, it's us. And we get to decide how this goes. We can spend our lives trying to appease men like Morrison, or we can stand our ground and deal with the consequences. She turned to face him. I'd rather deal with the consequences. Caleb crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. Even if those consequences destroy everything we've built? Even then, because at least we'll know we tried to build something worth having, not just something we were allowed to keep as long as we didn't make waves. They stood in silence, looking out at the land they'd spent months working, shaping, claiming as their own, the land that Morrison wanted to control. He's going to come back, Caleb said finally. He's going to push harder next time. I know. We might not be able to stop him. We might not, Clara agreed, but we're going to try anyway. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not love. Still, not quite that. But something close to it. Something that felt like recognition. All right, he said. We do it your way. But we're smart about it. We document everything. Make sure the water rights are ironclad legally. Get Tom on our side and anyone else we can trust. If Morrison wants a fight, we give him one he can't win by force alone. Clara nodded. Agreed. And we don't do this angry at each other. This only works if we're on the same side. We are on the same side. We just had to figure out what that meant. The next morning, they rode into Ridgeline together. Stopped at the land office first to confirm their water rights were properly registered. Then to the surveyor's office to get the property lines officially documented. Then to the general store where they bought supplies and casually mentioned to anyone who'd listen that someone had been asking about water rights. Word spread fast in a small town. By the time they left, half of Ridgeline knew that Morrison had made a play for the Ward Ranch and been turned down, and that Clara Ward, the woman who'd survived a blizzard and lost toes to frostbite, had been the one to turn him down. That'll get back to him, Caleb said as they rode home. That's the point. Now, if something happens to us or our water, everyone will know who to look at first. You're getting good at this. At what? Playing the game. Politics. Clara snorted. I hate politics, but I'm practical. And right now, making sure the whole territory knows Morrison tried to push us around is practical. 2 weeks later, a fence on their south pasture was cut. 20 head of cattle wandered onto Morrison's land before Caleb found them. Morrison's foreman claimed they'd strayed naturally, that the fence must have broken on its own. The fence wire had been cut clean through with pliers. Caleb fixed it and said nothing. But that night, he and Clara took turns keeping watch, rifles loaded and ready. A week after that, someone diverted part of the creek upstream, reducing the flow through their property by half. Caleb rode up to find a crude dam made of rocks and branches. He tore it down and followed the creek to its source, but whoever had built it was long gone. He's testing us, Clara said that evening, seeing what he can get away with. It's working. We're losing cattle weight because they're not getting enough water, and we're spending half our time guarding the place instead of working it. Then we hit back. How? Clara thought for a moment. Morrison's pride is his biggest weakness. He thinks he's untouchable. So we make him touchable. Make him look weak. I'm listening. His cattle use the same creek downstream, right? What if we did to him what he's doing to us? Not permanently, just enough to make a point. Caleb stared at her. You want to sabotage Frank Morrison. I want to show him that we can hurt him just as easily as he can hurt us. Make it clear that this goes both ways. That's escalation. He escalated first when he cut our fence. And if we get caught? We don't get caught. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but Caleb found himself nodding anyway. They went that night, riding in darkness to Morrison's land, found where the creek ran through his property, and built their own small dam. Nothing permanent, just enough to reduce his water flow for a day or two. They were back home before dawn, and no one was the wiser. 2 days later, Morrison showed up again. This time he wasn't alone. He had 3 of his ranch hands with him, all armed. Caleb and Clara met them in the yard. Clara had a rifle cradled in her arms, not pointing at anyone but present. Caleb had his pistol on his hip, hand resting near it. You've got some nerve, Morrison said without preamble. Don't know what you're talking about, Caleb replied. My water was cut off, same way yours was. Coincidence? Must be. Lots of things happen to water supplies. Animals, weather, could be anything. Morrison's jaw clenched. You think you're clever, but you're just making this worse for yourselves. Funny, Clara said. That's exactly what I was going to say to you. You need to learn your place, Mrs. Ward. I know my place. I'm standing on it right now. One of Morrison's hands shifted in his saddle, and Clara's rifle moved slightly, still not pointed at anyone, but the message was clear. Easy, Caleb said quietly. Nobody needs to do anything stupid. Tell that to your wife. My wife is the smartest person on this ranch. If she's holding a rifle, there's a reason. Morrison looked between them, calculating. Whatever he saw made him pull back. This isn't over, he said. Never thought it was, Clara replied. Morrison and his men rode off. As soon as they were out of sight, Caleb let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That could have gone badly, he said, but it didn't. Next time it might. The next time we'll deal with it. Clara lowered the rifle. He's scared. Did you see? He came here with 3 men because he wasn't sure what would happen if he came alone. We got under his skin. Getting under his skin isn't the same as winning. No, but it's a start. Over the next month, an uneasy truce settled in. Morrison didn't try anything else overt, and neither did they. But the tension remained, a constant presence in the background of their daily work. Clara threw herself into improving the ranch with almost obsessive focus. She redesigned the pasture rotation to maximize grass growth, started keeping detailed records of every cow's health and weight, negotiated a better price with the buyer in Ridgeline by pooling their cattle with Tom's and presenting a larger sale. "You're good at this," Tom said one day, reviewing the numbers Clara had shown him. "Better than most men I know." That's because most men think knowing how to rope a steer is the same as knowing how to run a business. It's not. Caleb's lucky to have you. Clara glanced across the yard where Caleb was working with a young horse, patient and steady. "I'm the lucky one. He didn't have to give me a chance, especially after what happened." "You mean the frostbite?" "I mean all of it. Most men would have left me in that cabin, or brought me back and dumped me with Dr. Pierce, or married me and treated me like an invalid. Caleb did none of those things. He sees what's actually there instead of what he expects to see. It's rare." Clara nodded slowly. "I'm starting to realize that." That night, after Tom left and the evening chores were done, Clara found Caleb on the porch. He was oiling his saddle, the familiar motions automatic after years of practice. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." "Why did you give me 1/3 of the ranch? Not half. I noticed that in the papers. 1/3. Why that number?" Caleb kept working, not looking up. "Because you earned 1/3 with what you've contributed. The rest you'll earn as we go." Seemed fair. Most men wouldn't see it that way. Most men are idiots. Clara smiled. "True." She sat down beside him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being scared of what Morrison might do." "Yeah?" "I was wrong to dismiss that. Your fear isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You know what we're up against better than I do." But I wasn't wrong about standing our ground. We just need to be smarter about how we do it." Caleb finally looked at her. "What are you suggesting?" "We need allies. Real ones. Tom's great, but we need more. Other ranchers who are tired of Morrison running things. Maybe some of the smaller outfits who are in the same position we are." She paused. "And I think we should go to the territorial governor, file a formal complaint about the fence cutting and the water diversion. Make it official. That's playing a long game. It's the only game worth playing. Morrison has power because people are afraid of him. But if enough of us stand together, if we make enough noise, that power starts to look like what it really is, bullying." But Caleb set down the saddle oil and rag. "When did you get so good at strategy?" "I watched my father fail at it for years. Learned what not to do." She looked out at the dark prairie. "You asked me once why I really came out here. I told you I wanted to be someone who mattered, but that's not quite right. I wanted to be someone who didn't let other people decide what I deserved, and that starts here. With us. With this. This being the ranch? This being the choice to fight for something instead of just accepting whatever we're given." They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. Closer, the horses shifted in the barn. "All right," Caleb said finally. "We do it your way. We build alliances. We go official. We fight smart." "We fight smart," Clara agreed. The winter that followed was the hardest Caleb had ever worked, and he'd been working ranches since he was 12. But it wasn't the physical labor that wore him down. It was the politics. The meetings with other ranchers. The careful conversations in Ridgeline where they planted seeds about Morrison's overreach. The trip to the territorial capital to file their complaint, which took 4 days of riding through early snow. Clara handled most of it. She had a way of talking to people that Caleb didn't. Direct but not aggressive, honest but strategic. She could sit with a rancher over coffee and walk away with an ally without that rancher quite realizing they'd been recruited. "You missed your calling," Caleb told her after one particularly successful trip to a neighboring ranch. "You should have been a politician." "Being a politician means caring what people think of you. I don't. I just care about results." "Same thing, isn't it? Not even close." By February, they'd quietly built a coalition of 7 small ranchers who'd all had problems with Morrison. Nothing organized, nothing formal. Just an understanding that if one of them had trouble, the others would back them up. It was enough that when Morrison made another move, this time trying to buy out a ranch adjacent to Caleb's land, he found himself facing unified opposition. The seller, an old man named Peterson who was ready to retire, turned down Morrison's offer and sold to a younger couple from Montana instead. Morrison was furious. He showed up at the Ward Ranch again, alone this time, and the conversation was brief and sharp. "You're turning people against me," he said. "I'm not turning anyone," Caleb replied. "I'm just making sure they've got options. This is my territory, has been for 15 years. Territory doesn't belong to anyone, it just is. You work it or you don't, but you don't own the whole damn county." Morrison's face was red. Whether from anger or cold, it was hard to tell. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe, but it won't be because I rolled over and let you take what's mine." After Morrison left, Clara came out of the house where she'd been watching from the window. "He's going to do something desperate," she said. "I know. We should be ready." "I know that too." But knowing it and being prepared for it turned out to be 2 different things. The fire started just before dawn in late March. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming. He was out of bed and running before his brain fully processed what was happening. The barn was burning. Flames already engulfed half the structure, licking up the walls toward the roof. Inside, the horses were panicking, kicking at their stalls. "Clara!" Caleb shouted, but she was already there, running toward the barn with a blanket to cover her face. "Get the horses!" she yelled. "I'll get water!" They worked in a frenzy. Caleb got the stall doors open and drove the horses out one by one, some so terrified they nearly trampled him. Clara and Tom, who'd appeared from nowhere, formed a bucket line from the well, throwing water on the flames, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a sieve. The barn was lost. They all knew it, but they kept fighting anyway, kept trying to save what they could. By the time the sun came up, all that remained was smoking timber and ash. They'd saved the horses and most of the tack, but the hay stores were gone. The grain was gone. The building itself was destroyed. Caleb stood in the ruins, covered in soot and ash, staring at the destruction. Clara stood beside him, her face grim. "Morrison," she said quietly. "We don't know that." "Yes, we do." Tom approached, equally blackened and exhausted. "Found this." He held up a tin can that reeked of kerosene. Was in the grass about 20 yards from where the fire started. Someone tossed it and ran. Caleb took the can, turned it over in his hands. Evidence. Clear, undeniable evidence of arson. "We take this to the sheriff," he said. "And say what?" Clara's voice was sharp. "That we think Morrison did this? Without proof it was him specifically? The sheriff's in Morrison's pocket. Everyone knows it." "Then what do you want to do?" Clara looked at the ruins, then at the can, then at Caleb. "I want to burn his barn down." "Clara, I'm not talking about actually doing it. I'm talking about making him think we might. Making him understand that if he escalates, so do we. That he can't hide behind his money and his hands. That we know it was him and we're not afraid to act on it." "That's insane." "No, it's proportional. He burned our barn. We show him we're capable of burning his, and then we see if he still thinks this war is worth fighting." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to say this was exactly the kind of escalation that would get them killed. But he looked at the destroyed barn, at the months of work gone up in smoke, at Clara's face tight with controlled fury, and he couldn't find the words. "We'll think about it," he said finally. "We can't just think about it. We have to act." "I said we'll think about it." The shout surprised both of them. Caleb never raised his voice, not like that. Clara stared at him, and he stared back, both of them exhausted and scared and angry. "I need time," Caleb said, quieter now. "Just give me time to think this through." Clara nodded stiffly. "Fine. You've got until tonight, then we decide." She walked away, limping more than usual from the strain of the morning. Tom watched her go, then looked at Caleb. "She's not wrong," Tom said. "I know. But she's also not entirely right." "I know that too." "So what are you going to do?" Caleb looked at the ruins of his barn, at the can of kerosene, at the ranch he'd built, and almost lost. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I'll figure it out." He had until nightfall to decide what kind of man he was going to be, what kind of partnership he and Clara really had, and how far they were both willing to go to protect what they'd built. The sun climbed higher, burning off the smoke, and Caleb stood in the ashes and tried to find an answer that wouldn't destroy everything. By midday, Caleb still hadn't decided. He'd spent the morning clearing debris from the barn site, hauling charred timber and twisted metal to a burn pile. Physical work helped him think, always had, but today it just made him more aware of how much they'd lost. Tom worked alongside him in silence, respecting the need for quiet. Clara had gone into town with the kerosene can, saying she wanted to document everything properly. Caleb suspected she was also giving him space to come to his own conclusion. Around noon, a rider appeared on the horizon. For a moment, Caleb tensed, thinking it might be Morrison or one of his men coming to gloat. But as the figure got closer, he recognized Peterson, the old rancher who'd sold his land to the Montana couple instead of Morrison. Peterson dismounted slowly, his joints stiff with age. He looked at the destroyed barn and whistled low. "Heard about this from the hands who came through my place this morning. Came to see if the stories were true." He shook his head. "Worse than I thought." "It's gone," Caleb said simply. "Morrison's work?" "Can't prove it." "Don't need to prove it to know it," Peterson spat in the dirt. "Man's been running roughshod over this territory for too long. Thought selling to those Montana folks instead of him might send a message. Guess he sent one back." "Guess so." Peterson studied Caleb with sharp old eyes. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Caleb leaned on his shovel, exhausted. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." "Your wife strikes me as the type who's already figured it out. She wants to hit back. Hard." "And you don't?" "I want to. That's what scares me. Because wanting something and it being right aren't always the same thing." Peterson nodded slowly. "You know what Morrison's counting on? That decent people won't sink to his level. That we'll take the high road and let him get away with whatever he wants because we're too civilized to fight dirty." He paused. "But sometimes the high road just means you get a better view of everything you're losing. So you think I should burn his barn down? I think you should do whatever keeps you from losing everything you've built. And if that means getting your hands dirty, so be it." Peterson looked at the ruins again. "But here's the thing. Morrison's got power because people are afraid of him, not because they respect him. You want to beat him, you don't fight his way. You take away what gives him that power." "How?" "Make him irrelevant. Show everyone he can burn a barn, but he can't break you. Build it back bigger. Rally every rancher who's sick of his tactics. Force the territorial government to actually do something instead of looking the other way. You beat him by refusing to let him define the terms." Caleb thought about that, about Clara's anger and his own fear and the question of what kind of man he wanted to be. "That's a long game," he said. "Only game worth playing. The short game is just revenge, satisfying but empty." Peterson pulled himself back into the saddle with effort. "But I'll tell you this. Whatever you decide, I'll back you. And I suspect most of the territory will too. They've been waiting for someone to stand up to Morrison. Might as well be you." After Peterson left, Caleb found Tom sitting on what remained of a fence post, drinking from a canteen. "He's right, you know," Tom said. "About the long game." "I know. But Clara's right too. About needing to show strength." "I know that too. That's the problem." Tom handed him the canteen. "Maybe it's not an either-or. Maybe you can do both." Caleb drank, the water tepid but wet. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you're thinking like it has to be your way or Clara's way, but you're partners. Maybe the answer is something neither of you thought of yet." Before Caleb could respond, Clara returned from town. She dismounted stiffly and walked over, her expression unreadable. "Sheriff wasn't interested," she said without preamble. "Said fires happen, could have been an accident, no way to prove otherwise. The kerosene can could have been from anyone. Morrison owns him." "Obviously. She looked at the work they'd done, the cleared space where the barn had stood. We need to talk. Yeah, we do. They walked away from Tom, down toward the creek where the water still ran clear despite everything Morrison had tried. Clara sat on a rock by the bank, and Caleb sat beside her. I've been thinking, Clara said, about what I said this morning, about burning his barn. And? And I was wrong. Not about wanting to hit back. I still want that. But about how we do it. She picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. Burning his barn just makes us like him. And I didn't survive a blizzard and lose my toes to become like Frank Morrison. Caleb felt relief wash through him. So what do you want to do? I want to break him. Completely. But legally. She turned to look at him. I went to the land office after the sheriff. Pulled records on Morrison's water rights. Turns out he doesn't own them all. Some of the water that feeds his ranch comes from federal land, and there are regulations about how much private ranchers can divert from federal sources. You think he's violating those regulations? I think he's been violating them for years. I also think if someone filed a formal complaint with the territorial office and backed it up with documentation, they'd have to investigate. She pulled papers from her saddlebag. I got copies of everything. Water surveys, Morrison's filed claims, federal guidelines, it's all here. Caleb took the papers, scanning them. His reading wasn't as strong as Clara's, but he could see what she was getting at. Morrison had been taking more water than he was legally entitled to, probably for years, and no one had challenged it because no one had the guts or the knowledge to know how. This could actually work, he said slowly. It will work, but only if we commit to it. No halfway. We file the complaint. We push it through every official channel we can find, and we make enough noise that they can't ignore it. She paused. And we rebuild the barn. Start tomorrow. Make it clear that he didn't break us. That's expensive. We don't have the money for... We will. I've been working the numbers. If we sell off some of the yearlings early, pool resources with Tom and the others, and I take on bookkeeping for some of the smaller ranches for a fee, we can cover it. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. But I'd rather do it with you than despite you. Caleb stared at her, this woman who'd nearly died in his arms less than a year ago, and was now planning to take down the most powerful man in the territory through paperwork and strategy. You're terrifying, he said. I'm practical. There's a difference. Is there? Clara smiled slightly. Maybe not. They started rebuilding the barn the next day. Word spread fast. Clara made sure of it. By the end of the week, ranchers from across the territory were showing up with lumber, nails, labor. Some came because they liked Caleb. Some came because they were tired of Morrison. Most came because they wanted to see what would happen when someone finally stood up to the man who'd been running things his way for 15 years. Peterson showed up with 2 of his old hands and enough timber to frame half the structure. The Montana couple who'd bought his ranch brought tools and a wagon full of supplies. Even Dutch from the saloon in Ridgeline rode out with a case of whiskey and stayed to help hammer boards. Didn't know you did construction, Caleb said, watching Dutch struggle with a crossbeam. I don't, but I do hate bullies, and I figure the enemy of my enemy is someone I should help build a barn for. Within 2 weeks, the new barn was up. Not as large as the old one, but sturdier, better designed. Clara had drawn up plans that maximized space and airflow, creating something more efficient than what they'd lost. It's not just rebuilt, Tom said, looking at the finished structure. It's better. That was the point, Clara replied. While the barn went up, Clara worked on the other front. She filed the formal complaint about Morrison's water rights with the territorial office. Then she sent copies to the governor's office, then to the newspaper in the territorial capital, then to every rancher within 50 miles, making sure everyone knew what Morrison had been doing. The response was immediate. The territorial office announced an investigation. The newspaper ran a story. Other ranchers started checking their own water rights and discovering similar violations. Morrison showed up at the ranch one last time in late May, but this time he came alone and on foot, his horse tied at the property line, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome to ride any further. Caleb and Clara met him in front of the new barn. Neither of them was armed, but they didn't need to be. Morrison looked older somehow, diminished. You've made your point, he said without preamble. Have we? Clara replied. The territorial office is threatening to revoke my water permits. My buyers are asking questions. My hands are looking for work elsewhere because they don't want to be associated with... He stopped, jaw clenched. You've made your point. Good, Caleb said. Then you understand how it feels to have someone come after what you've built. I could fight this. I've got lawyers. Money. You could, Clara agreed, but you won't win, because this time you don't have the law on your side. And every day you fight is another day everyone in the territory sees that the great Frank Morrison can be beaten by a rancher and his wife with some water surveys and determination. Morrison's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. What do you want? We want you to leave us alone, Caleb said. Leave our water alone, our fences alone, our land alone. We want you to stop acting like you own this whole territory. And if I agree, then we stop pushing the investigation, file an amendment to the complaint saying you've agreed to remediate the violations. You reduce your water usage to legal limits and everyone moves on. Morrison stared at them both. You could destroy me. Why give me a way out? Because destroying you doesn't help us, Clara said. We don't need you gone. We just need you to understand that you're not the only one who matters out here. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even really peace. But it was an ending to the immediate threat, and sometimes that was enough. Morrison left without shaking hands or making promises. But 3 days later, his foreman showed up with a letter formally agreeing to reduce the ranch's water usage and respect the ward property boundaries. The territorial office closed the investigation with a warning. The war was over. That summer, the ranch thrived. The new barn proved its worth. The cattle fattened on good grass and regular water. The coalition of small ranchers that had formed in response to Morrison started meeting regularly, sharing resources and information, creating a network of support that made everyone stronger. Clara took on bookkeeping for 6 other ranches, building a side income that helped cushion their finances. She was good at it, seeing patterns in numbers that others missed, finding efficiencies that saved money without cutting quality. You should do this full time, Tom told her one day, reviewing the books she'd organized for him. Maybe someday, but not yet. I still want to work the land. Even with the limp? Especially with the limp. Reminds me what I survived to get here. In August, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening after dinner, sitting on the porch they'd rebuilt when they'd rebuilt the barn. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. I'm going to have a baby, she said, not looking at him. Caleb's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. You're sure? I'm sure. 3 months, if I'm calculating right. He set down the cup carefully. How do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, worried, all of it at once. She finally looked at him. I didn't plan this. We didn't plan this. No, but we didn't plan most of what happened this year. That's true, she laughed nervously. A year ago, I was dying in a cabin. Now I'm building a ranch and having a baby. Life doesn't make much sense. Never has. Don't see why it should start now. They sat in silence for a while, processing what this meant. A child. Their child. A permanent bond beyond the practical partnership they'd built. Are you happy? Clara asked quietly. Caleb thought about it. About the woman he'd found half frozen and barely alive. About the fights and the struggles and the slow building of something neither of them had planned but both of them wanted. About the fact that somewhere in all of it, his feelings had shifted from respect to something deeper. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Good. Because I need you to be. I can't do this alone. You're not alone. Haven't been since I pulled you out of that cabin. Clara's hand found his, scarred fingers interweaving. I never thanked you, not properly, for saving my life. You've thanked me every day by making it worth saving. She was quiet for a moment. I think I love you. I'm not sure. I don't know if I know what love is supposed to feel like, but whatever this is, this partnership, this trust, this feeling that I'd rather face anything with you than face nothing without you. If that's not love, it's close enough. Caleb squeezed her hand. Close enough works for me. The baby was born in March, almost exactly a year after the barn burning. A girl, healthy and loud and perfect. They named her Eleanor after Clara's grandmother, the one who'd lost fingers to a threshing machine and kept working anyway. Strong name for a strong baby, Dr. Pierce said, wrapping the infant in blankets. She's going to need it, growing up out here. She'll be fine, Clara said, exhausted but smiling. She's got good examples. That spring, they expanded the ranch, bought the parcel of land adjacent to theirs when it came up for sale, increasing their herd capacity by a third. Clara couldn't work as much with a newborn, but she found ways to contribute, managing accounts from the house, planning the expansion, making decisions about breeding stock and market timing. "You're building an empire," Tom said one day, bouncing Eleanor on his knee while Clara worked on the books. "I'm building security," Clara corrected, "for her, so she never has to feel like she doesn't have choices." Sounds like empire talk to me. Then maybe empire talk isn't so bad. By the time Eleanor was 2, the ranch had doubled in size. By the time she was 5, it was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Clara's bookkeeping side business had grown into a full consulting operation, and ranchers from 3 territories over sought her advice. "You should write a book," Caleb told her one evening, watching her explain profit margins to a rancher from Wyoming. "About what?" "About how to run a ranch when everyone thinks you can't. Might help other people." Clara considered it. "Maybe I will, when I have time." "You'll never have time. Time's something you make." So she made time. Wrote in the mornings before Eleanor woke up, chronicling everything she'd learned about ranching, business, survival. Not as an instruction manual, but as a record of what was possible when you refused to accept limitations others tried to impose. The book was published 3 years later, distributed by a small press in Denver. It didn't sell particularly well, but the people who read it, women mostly, scattered across the frontier, wrote letters thanking her for proving it could be done. Eleanor grew up strong and stubborn, taking after both parents. She learned to ride before she could properly read, learned to shoot before she was 10, learned to negotiate before she was 12. She had her mother's head for numbers and her father's patience with animals. "She's going to run this place someday," Tom said, watching the girl work with a difficult horse at age 14, calm and confident. "That's the plan," Caleb agreed. "You two did good, building all this." "We did what we had to. The good part was just refusing to give up." Morrison died when Eleanor was 15, found dead in his study of a heart attack. His ranch was sold off in pieces, his empire divided among his children who immediately started fighting over the scraps. The Ward Ranch bought one of those pieces, the parcel with the disputed water rights that had started everything. "Strange how things turn out," Clara said, standing on that land with Caleb, watching their cattle graze. "Is it? Seems like the natural result of decisions made. He chose one way. We chose another. And we're still here. We're still here." Years passed. Eleanor grew up and married a ranch hand from Montana who had her mother's work ethic and her father's steadiness. They had children of their own, 2 boys and a girl, who learned the same lessons their grandmother had learned about resilience and adaptation and refusing to quit. Caleb and Clara grew old together, their bodies wearing down from decades of hard work, but their minds sharp. They sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sun set over land they'd fought for and won, talking less because they didn't need words to understand each other anymore. One evening, when they were both in their 70s and Eleanor was running the ranch with her husband, Clara looked over at Caleb. "Do you remember what you said to me when you found me in that cabin?" "I said a lot of things. You said, 'I came to find you,' like it was the simplest thing in the world, like riding into a blizzard to save a stranger was just something you did." "It was something I did? Why though, really? After all these years, why did you come?" Caleb thought about it, about the letters and the promise and the feeling that sometimes you had to do something impossible just to prove you could. "Because you deserved it," he said finally. "Because someone should have been there for you, and I happened to be the one who could. And because leaving you there would have meant accepting a world where that kind of thing was okay. And I wasn't willing to accept that world. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Is it romantic? I always thought it was just practical." Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie. "Maybe for us, practical is romantic." "Maybe it is." They sat as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, The same mountains that had nearly killed Clara 45 years earlier. The same mountains that now framed a life neither of them could have imagined back then. Successful, stable, full. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked. "Coming here. Everything that happened." Clara looked at her hands, still scarred, still missing fingertips. Looked at her feet, still misshapen from the frostbite. Looked at the ranch, the family, the life they'd built from survival and stubbornness. "Not for a second," she said. "Good. Because I don't either. Even when I was insufferable about Morrison. Especially then. You were right about that. I was right about a lot of things. Don't let it go to your head." "Too late." They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who'd survived enough to know what mattered and what didn't. When Caleb died at 78, it was in his sleep, quietly, without drama. Clara found him in the morning and sat with him for an hour before calling anyone, just holding his hand one last time. "You kept your promise," she told him, even though he couldn't hear. "All of them. Thank you for that." She lived 3 more years, long enough to see Eleanor's daughter take over the ranch's bookkeeping, long enough to know the ward name meant something in the territory, meant resilience, meant fairness, meant the kind of strength that came from refusing to break. When her time came, she was surrounded by family in the house Caleb had shown her that first day, the house that had become home in ways she'd never expected. "Was it worth it?" Eleanor asked, holding her mother's hand. "Everything you went through?" Clara looked at her daughter, at her grandchildren, at the life that had grown from that desperate walk through a blizzard and a stranger's impossible decision to save her. "Every second," she whispered, and then she closed her eyes and let go, knowing she'd built something that would last long after she was gone, something that proved you could lose pieces of yourself to the cold and still become whole. Something that showed love didn't have to be perfect or easy or even expected. It just had to be honest and committed and brave enough to weather any storm. The Ward Ranch stood for 3 more generations before the land was finally sold, and even then the family kept the original house, the one Caleb and Clara had shared, kept it as a reminder of where they'd come from and what they'd survived. And sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind howled down from the mountains, people swore they could see 2 figures on the porch, sitting together in comfortable silence, watching over the land they'd fought so hard to keep. Just 2 people who'd made impossible choices and somehow found their way to something extraordinary. Not because it was easy, not because it was destined, but because when faced with the choice between giving up and pushing forward, they chose to push. Together, every single time. And that made all the difference.